what is the best way for you to reach consistent sales growth? It's a big question for any business. Here to talk to you now about the influences on travel purchases is Sarah Quinlan from MasterCard. She's the Senior Vice President and Group Head of Market Insights for MasterCard Advisors, the Analytics and Insights Consulting Unit of MasterCard. So she can look at macro and microeconomic trends related to consumer spending and retail sales. Sarah and her team analyse and predict spending patterns based on the billions of anonymous purchases MasterCard processes every year. Ladies and gentlemen, please make welcome to the stage Sarah Quinlan.
Thank you. All right, I'm the American, so I can actually talk about Trump. And he actually literally lives down the street from me. I live in Palm Beach, Florida, so we can also talk about that too. All right, so the interesting thing about what we do is I spent 35 years on Wall Street before I joined MasterCard. And I had used the data of MasterCard to make macroeconomic decisions for my clients. I retired and my family doesn't really like me, so they said go back to work. And so what I do is come in and advise people about what we're seeing in the data, because it's so critical. So we see 160 million transactions an hour. However, what we do uniquely is we add additional data to that, and 1.5 million rules and algorithms. I have 2,000 data scientists who work with me. And we bring it up to total retail spend, including cash and check. And the Australian government uses this data, as do governments around the world, as does the Fed, who just raised interest rates, because we could actually see inflation ahead of when it was announced, for example. So I'm going to actually take you through the data so you can actually see how people are spending and really understand what this means. So I have lawyers, you do too. Come on, we all got them. But the key thing to understand is I want you to level set yourself on this data, because we hear a lot of assumptions, we hear a lot of comments, well, the Chinese are spending this, or the Americans are spending that, or these people do that. And I'm going to tell you what they actually do. All right, because remember, I see cash, check. By the way, a little hint, MasterCard invented the ATM machine. Just a little hint. All right, so understanding what we're going to do. So let's look at the global consumer, all right? Well, the key thing to understand here is, as was mentioned earlier, is that we actually do see GDP really recovering. However, it's really consumers that are doing it. The interesting thing about this recovery, which is different from any other recovery we've seen, is this is really consumer-led. We wish businesses would invest. They're not. They're sitting on massive amounts of cash. But the consumer is confident, and she is spending. And by the way, she is 75% of the transactions in the world. And gentlemen, you know we influence the other 25%. So understand, we've got to think about marketing to her. All right, and that's a very important distinction I want you all to take away, because she makes that decision, and more importantly, she actually makes that transaction. All right, so we're going to start with Australia. So Spending Pulse is our monthly report that we come out with. We just came out with spending already for February. And you can see that we actually see spending growing here quite heftily. And this is interesting, because one of the things when people talk about tourism and what we're hearing is everybody coming from everywhere else. But you forget that you all do a heck of a lot of going around your country. It's physically big, and there's great places to see in other parts of the country. So watching the health of the economy here is really critical. However, you are the one country in the world that still buys clothes. I want you to really be clear about this. The rest of the world, we're naked. And what I mean by this is we haven't seen any clothing consumption anywhere else in the world because we actually really don't care about it anymore. We care about other things. But why is that? Well, to be perfectly honest, you guys were buffered from the recession. If you had been living in the United States or the United Kingdom or other places in the world, you would have understood that we broke the social contract in 2008. And everybody who before thought, well, I have a job, I work hard, I buy a house, my assets will go up over time, and I will have a job for life, my pension will be there, that was broken. We ripped that away. We went bankrupt. Banks went bankrupt, everything. So people's spending behaviors in the rest of the world have changed, and all they care about is experiences. Now, you've heard this, but I cannot tell you how important it is and how much you must recognize that you live a very sort of sheltered life down here in Australia relative to the rest of the world. And the rest of the world doesn't look this way. So in fact, we're overstored on retail in the rest of the world. You're not, but they are. And so it's a very different thing. So this is where you need to pounce. Not just be nice about this and say, okay, let's get a few more tourists down here. You should be like grabbing these humans and grabbing them down here and getting them to spend, because this is all they care about doing. And it's not just the millennials, by the way. My generation, I'm a baby boomer, we're the richest generation ever, probably that ever will be, all right? And more importantly, for some reason, unlike my mother, we actually feel sorry for our children. And so we're not only spending on ourselves, we're spending on them too. So the reality is you should be grabbing my money like there's no tomorrow and getting me to come here and spend. And that's what we're doing. We're spending on experiences. So what we're not doing is spending on department stores. So by the way, this is your indicator that Chinese spending into Australia is slowing, because this is the primary place that they spend. Not in the specialty retail, but in the department stores. So it's very important to recognize that change of spend pattern here where you actually see it dropping. And then this is to finally tell you, by the way, all of you, that your housing market is finally slowing. And you didn't think it was going to happen, but it is. And this is how we see it, because the household goods spending slows first as the housing market slows. All right, so let's talk around the world. So this is the United Kingdom. Now this looks really strong. This is a absolutely fool you chart, all right? Because the reason that we see the spending, look at the spending in June 2016. That's when the vote is. That's what the spending really looks like in Britain. The rest of the spending you see there is inflation. With the pound dropping 20%, the price of food and the price of petrol has gone up so significantly that that's what's adding to retail sales there, not consumption. All right, and in fact, the only other thing that's happening is Americans are going to see the Queen. All right, so we're taking advantage of the weak pound and we're going and traveling there. So this is a very much of a fooling economy, and it's very concerning to you, and you should understand why, and we'll get there. This is my economy, all right? Now, this is not Sarah Quinlan spending all the time. By the way, the drop up in February is just because we had a leap year the year before. So spending is really, really, really strong in the United States. Remember, this is 70% of the US economy is consumer spending, 7-0. 12% is exports. So we don't care that the dollar's strong and the rates went up today. We couldn't care less because 70% of us work for small businesses. So again, understand this is going to continue. And I'll make my little Trump comment right now. So the reality is, all right, is everyone is spending regardless, all right? And they will for at least the next 6 months. And the most important thing to recognize there is nothing's happened to anybody's life yet, except for we all have jobs. And in fact, the most important thing that we know is more people are quitting their job without having another job than before the recession. And that's how strong that economy is. So it will continue that way. And if he has a trade war with China, yes, it will hurt the Walmart consumer. There's no doubt about it. But the reality is we do believe that, cooler minds will prevail. We just don't like tweets at 3 in the morning, period. All right? But overall, the economy is doing quite well there. All right, this is China, though. All right, so I want you to really recognize the impact of what's going on. So what's going on? Well, the president of mainland China has arrested 100,000 people for corruption. And so thus, the high-end spender who was spending and the upper middle-class spender who was going into Hong Kong is no longer going into Hong Kong. This is a very important thing to recognize, that there's capital controls now. They can only take $50,000 out. And there's capital controls on the banks as well in terms of what they can wire out. So the key thing I want you to say is, I'm not negative saying that the Chinese spender will never be there. But what I'm telling you is to be very cautious, because putting 100,000 people in jail is a big deterrent to people spending, and spending in big amounts. So it's one thing to be very cautious, but I wouldn't bank my entire marketing strategy upon them, right? Because look at the length of time that there's not been spending there. And this is the key thing to appreciate. And you'll say, Sarah, they spend in cash. Remember, I told you, I see the cash. So understand that I'm understanding their entire spending has really dropped around the world. And that is the key thing to appreciate. All right, let's talk about tourism. So where do people come from? This is no surprise. We've already gone through this chart, so we won't waste the time there. But know that the Kiwis, they're very important. They spend a lot when they're here, and the Chinese do too. But look at the change. This is the point to understand sort of the evolution over time, all right? The key thing that I want to say that I think is really disappointing, all right, is that you don't see a movement in the US consumer there. Why should you care? Because last year in the United States, Airline spending was up 4.4% domestically and 9.2% internationally. And the majority of that was international travel was to Asia. So that dispels the myth that Americans won't spend to the amount to come down here, nor will they travel the distance, because they absolutely will do both. And the key thing is, to be perfectly honest, unfortunately Americans are kind of insular. Only 40% of us have a passport. We can't leave the island, all right? So this is a problem in the first place. So you've got to get us to understand what we're going to do here. I can't emphasize this enough, that most people really like that cuddly koala bear we saw earlier, or the kangaroos. Okay, not the kangaroos, all right? But the point is that that's what our image is. We need a lot more marketing into the United States about exactly what to do here. Because that's the point. You need to curate it for them. 85% of the people we know at MasterCard use a mobile device when they're shopping. That's the point. 85% of the people use that mobile device. So curating your product there to us is extremely important. Why does it matter? Because the American consumer, when they come to Australia, spends 10.4 times what the Chinese consumer does. That's why you should care. All right? Because in other words, you need fewer of them, but they spend a heck of a lot more. And that's the key thing. All right, so in other words, looking at sort of the domination, obviously you've seen the big change. But the key thing with the Japanese, what happened there? They strengthened the yen, by the way. That was what happened. So their central bank played into this, and the strength in the yen, it was the only market, by the way, that actually increased their spending into the United States last year with our strong dollar, was the Japanese market as well. So currencies do play a big place. It's really funny. I spent 35 years learning how to trade currencies, and all I needed was a smartphone. Steve Jobs was a little late in my career, but that's the whole point, is everybody now knows what the cost is and how things change over time, and that's a critical thing. All right, so then we look at sort of like the percentage change of the visitors. The interesting thing is the fall off, all right? And the fall off is you're going into really nice weather. Now, obviously we know that it's holidays around the world in the month of December, but it's interesting to understand that this is where you should be attracting more visitors, and you're not. And we actually saw this last year, because as we saw, the economy was improving, and we did not see people increasing here in coming and visiting. And I think this is the concern, and this is how you have to sort of take the data in real time and say, what do I need to do, and adjust in my marketing efforts to actually, first of all, as an organization of Tourism Australia, and then down to your individual businesses, reach out and push. So what do we do about this? Well, for example, we have created propensity models of every person in Australia, in the United States, in Great Britain. And we've created digital audiences that sit on the regular advertising exchange. Because the key thing that we know is once someone has a purchasing behavior, they repeat it. We don't have midlife crises. We actually sort of spend the same way. But the key thing is that you don't know everything. So you can say, I can search for something, but with respect to our friend from Google, but the more important thing is, what do I actually spend on? So you would say, okay, this woman's from Wall Street. She probably likes fine food, fine wine, all that type of thing, and she probably travels a bit and everything. But what you would know if you looked at my actual spending profile is I really over-index on sporting events. I go around the world, all right? I first came down to Australia for the America's Cup in the 80s down here, all right? So the point is, I go around the world, and that's in my spending profile. So what's gonna get me down here? A sporting event. Well, absolutely, I was down here for the Open. So those are the types of things that will work. The second thing that's in my profile is I happen to be a huge fan of country music. So a Keith Urban concert down here will also drive me down here. So those are the types of things that wouldn't be just obvious in my profile, and that's why using people's actual spending behavior gives you a much higher chance of them lifting. And here's the point of the stats on it. We know when we run these digital audience campaigns, they have between a 400% and 600% lift versus a regular advertising campaign. That's how predictable people are, right? Why? Because we don't have time. Time is the most valuable thing, because now, post the recession, there's 2 people in a family working. So the key thing is, anything we can do to help save that time is really critical in our purchasing behavior. All right, moving on here. So we talked about currencies, but why am I showing this? Because it really does change. All right, so this is watching, and you can actually watch as the dollar has strengthened, the dollar has weakened here, right? And that's the key thing. The strengthening of the Aussie dollar in the third and fourth quarter hurts And that's an important thing to appreciate. So, you know, somebody talking to the central bank never hurts to try to keep it in a modest level. Because again, people do have in mind the certain amount that they want to spend on a trip. And that's a key thing. So here's looking at the different countries. I want you to note the drop in the Chinese spending that we've seen, all right? So we've actually seen each month to month, their increased the spending coming into the country has been dropping. But watch, and then Japan's also. So it's interesting to watch how things tailed off in the third and the fourth quarter last year. And then the US spending again, but look at the Brits. This is the point of Brexit. This is exactly what this means to your economy here, all right? That, you know, these are people who love to come here, all right? And have spent a lot of money when they come here, all right? But understanding that this impact of the uncertainty of what this means in their lives is bigger than anyone can recognize. It is my #1 risk for 2017. All right, is that basically when the negotiations start at the end of this month, both sides will throw their toys out of the pram and it'll make everybody nervous, and uncertainty is where people stop spending. So let's just hope that clearer minds prevail, all right, and that people start with a position realizing that nobody's going to get everything they want, and then slowly you'll see spending recover. But I think it'll be a while before you see British spending here recover, because they are traveling in Britain, but they're staying much closer, because again, it's that uncertainty. I'm not going to do a big, huge outlay when I don't really know what my economic circumstances. Am I even going to be living in the UK, or do I have to move because I'm not going to have a passport to go work and do what I need to do? And this is a critical thing. And it's going to, you know, it's a 2-year negotiation, and that's the point. It leads a long period of uncertainty. All right, and then the interesting thing is that we're watching as they weakened the renminbi, right? And this has been very important because for years, you know, we've been, you know, and one of the things the president was saying is that he was going to accuse them of being a currency manipulator. Well, they aren't manipulating anymore. They maybe did years ago, but they don't right now. And in fact, they're trying desperately and using trillions of dollars to try to stop the currency from depreciating, but it's not. But that hurts their spending power coming in here. Do not forget, it's important to them as well. So it's an important thing. And remember, only 120 million people in China have a passport. So it's a critical thing to realize. There's only so many people. There's 1.2 billion people there, but they can't leave, right? So that's a big issue, that you've got a population you're going after who is becoming more affluent. But again, this is a big, big shift, all right? And remember, this year is their 5-year party Congress. So there's a lot of nervousness amongst them as to what things are going to look like, because it's not a joke to have zombie banks. And they have zombie banks and they have zombie companies. And it's a real challenge to try to manage that debt bubble, which they manage because they have trillions of reserves and they're happy to do so. But what it means is that they can't invest in other things. And that's the challenge for them. All right. So, and again, you can watch some of the gains here that we watch in terms of Chinese spending onto retail. They clearly are the biggest retail shoppers when they do come here, all right, into Australia, versus Americans who spend on hotels. And the Brits, yes, they drink. They go to bars the most. So that's their big thing that they do when they spend here, all right? And so, but they are a value-conscious consumer, which is very important. And this is the key thing, is that they actually go where the international brands are the cheapest. And that's a key thing. And that's why, for example, we've seen a huge drop of Chinese spending into the United States, because of the appreciation of the dollar. The US dollar has made those international brands they like so much very expensive for them. So it's a big change in terms of what you're seeing. Let me be clear. We talk a lot, or a little bit in this conference already, about terrorism and issues on that. It is huge. The spending of the Chinese into France is down 47%. The spending into Turkey is down even more than that, by all people. So understand, it really has a factor. So the safety and security of Australia is huge, and it's very important to people when they travel. So the Chinese are likely, as I mentioned earlier, to spend on the department stores, although they're starting to slightly get a little bit more into specialty apparel, which is a key thing to think about. Europeans like adventure. I'd used rental cars as a great proxy here because it means they're willing to drive. Americans are obviously terrified, and we don't know our shadow, so we don't ever leave. That's because we spend the most on hotels, probably. But the point to understand is that this is the key thing of understanding, again, your consumer. You can't just take everybody as if they're the same, but it gives you an indication of how to think about. So what it's saying is that the American's going to be much more city-to-city jumping as opposed to driving. So you have to think about when you're planning out their tourist sort of things, whereas, you know, the tourist from the UK is much more adventuresome in terms of driving around. I think it's because we frankly are too stupid to know how to drive on the side of the road you drive on, okay? But that's just my opinion, all right? For us, it's all about experiences. So let's be very, very clear about this. So think about it. You have got to show us what we're going to be doing, all right? Whether it's climbing on the bridge, or whether it's, you know, bungee jumping, or swimming with the whales, or doing whatever we're going to be doing. Give us that visualization. Put those, you know, videos on the website. Have people understand, because we want experiences. We were destroyed in 2008, and all of us thought we had a job. And 12% of the houses in the United States are still underwater on their mortgages. So people can't move. So the point is that, you know, people realize that life changed permanently. So all we want to do is like our family and friends again. It's one of the greatest things that came out of the recession is we actually know who they are. All right. But you know, I mean, but it's a big difference. You know, before all we just did is work. But the key thing is you've got to help us know what to do. We're kind of dumb, and we need that help. All right, and so again, this is really understanding. So even though we've had a sort of a moderating increase of visitors, the Americans here are very, very focused on the general recreation spending. In terms of the UK, we're looking at restaurants as well as the bars, so it's very important to understand the culinary travel, key, very huge. And by the way, I'll make a point here. Americans, in terms of restaurant spending, biggest in the world, but the key thing to understand, if you want to go for the millennial, that's how you get the millennial down here. Backpacking, nice idea. Millennials are now in the United States 52% restaurant, 48% grocery. They'll never know how to cook. All right, so the point to understand, and by the way, they have kids already. The oldest millennials are 35, 36 years old. They have kids, they just take them out to eat all the time. So the key thing, but again, culinary tourism for them will be perfect, right? Backpacking? No. Dining out? Yes. So this is the key thing of really sort of disabusing people. And by the way, one of the big things, everybody thinks that, you know, old people like me don't use the internet. The millennials buy everything online. In fact, that is not the case around the world. The behavior of online does not change between age. It's only a function, frankly, of income. All right? So the real issue to understand is the more rich you are, the more you buy online. And that's the most interesting thing. So the reality is that, you know, as much as market to me to buy and lock myself in online, as much as you do to millennials. There's not a difference in behavior. That's a myth. That's not what's in the data. So it's a key thing. Live performances, obviously very important. And domestic spending, a key thing to be thinking. Spectator sports, all right? You got some great sports down here, all right? Like the rugby league, you know, all those types of things, great stuff. But again, these are the types of things where you can bring people in and have them explore and understand things and learn a new event and tie something in around that. So what did we do at MasterCard? Well, we're only, you know, as you know, business to business. We don't, you know, actually sell anything to a consumer. However, as you know, we market to consumers, right? And that's where we came up with the Priceless campaign. So we have Priceless Sydney, right? And people in the United States and in the UK and all of our elite card holders around the world actually go on Priceless Sydney when they're coming here and they pick up a package. So have you ever thought to put up a package and work with us to get your marketing on Priceless? Because people go directly to that site and pick up a priceless experience, all right, that they only MasterCard holders can get. And so obviously one of the things that we're doing right now is for this year and the next 4 years, we're sponsoring the Australian Open. So, you know, we put that in as a priceless experience. So understand, these are the types of things we realized that we as a brand had to do to differentiate ourselves. And we don't even sell to these humans, right? So this is the key thing to appreciate. It's understanding that branding, marketing, creating an experience, creating a differentiation is so the way to drive people's behavior. And that's what we're trying to do, is help all of our partners, and you're our partners, because you accept us. We know you accept us. And then, you know, but that's the whole point. We want our partners to continue to have their business, because why? Well, to be perfectly honest, one of the ways to get the world economy going off a stall speed, which is really what it's been in the last 8 years, and into acceleration speed, is to get the velocity of money going. And that's through financial inclusion. We've made a commitment at MasterCard that by 2020, we'll have 500 million people around the world more financially included, right? And we know that that doesn't necessarily mean having a bank account. It means having people be able to digitally have their money work. So safety and security is something very important, and I want you to make certain that it's very important that you think about how you do acceptance and how you take, these payments and down payments and all those types of things, online and in person. Because the one way that you can actually destroy your business is to get hacked for people's data. But not so much the data. People don't mind giving you their name, where they live. They darn well do not want their financial data gone. And so the key thing I encourage you to invest in, and we focus on it every single day, is safety and security. And we have a whole division that just works on fraud because of the fraudsters have a job to do every day, and so do we. So don't ignore that part of your business, because you could offer the greatest experience in the world, but if all of a sudden you get hacked and all your data is gone, it will be a heck of a hard road to build it back. So it's very important to recognize that. It shouldn't surprise you, since Americans are always so skinny that we don't eat, right? But obviously, this is really showing you the point that we really do use culinary adventures. And it's very, very important to think about. And you have a really unique cuisine down here. And it's amazing. And it's one of the reasons I come down here and bring my family down here, is because of it. And I think it doesn't get emphasized enough. And I think it's another thing that I personally, as it's one of my favorites, this is my 100th and second visit to Australia, all right, in my lifetime. So I've come here a lot. And so to understand that this is a place that I think is really special, and it's not too far. And that whole myth that it's too far, it doesn't work, all right? So understanding, again, the restaurant scene mirrors exactly the spending that we see in the United States on restaurants. So that is why we think this is priceless. All right? Because what I've shown you is actual data of what people are doing. And the key thing to understand is that behavior will be repeated. Now, in some cases, it's a slowing behavior. So what it means is you need to react to that and adapt what you're doing to sort of say, look, there's another way to think about this. There's another market I can go after. There's additional people. There's additional people that might like my service. What am I doing? How do I find like-for-like people? And that's the key thing to really think about what actual spending behavior does, because it really will give you that ability to go after people. And so from that, I'm going to just say that's priceless. And if there are any questions, I've got exactly 3 minutes and 42 seconds left.
Any questions for Sarah? I've got one. You were talking about getting specific information about spending behaviour. How does a business get their mitts on that sort of data? How do you get that sort of specific information if you're a small business?
Right, so there's a couple things that we do, all right? So we obviously have our monthly report that comes out in terms of spending. We also run a destination insights report where you can actually see for Australia the number of, the 10 countries which are coming in and what they're actually spending on. And then we actually can take it down to a region or a city and actually know exactly what people are spending on. So it really can get the understanding of the lift and get the differentiation, because obviously Australia is not just one country. It is different regions, it's different cities and things like that. So it really comes down to that. And then we do specific projects for people that want to do even more detailed work in a specific focused area.
Any questions for Sarah up here?
Hi, thank you. Listen, how do you think news reports such as the bleaching of the barrier reef affect our various campaigns? Do you think it makes people rush to try and see it as a last chance option? Or do they then bow out and choose other opportunities?
Oh, absolutely not. The scarcity is the most important thing that you can create. And now that we have a president that doesn't believe in climate change in the United States, it's something I would be emphasizing heavily. And I mean it in all seriousness, because this is a really important thing to recognize, all right? And whether the Kyoto Protocol is going to be followed and this and that is really up for grabs. And it's very important, all right? We all know this globally, and this is a key thing, and we do watch people going to the Galapagos. We watch people going to the Great Barrier Reef, and these are places that sort of are on people's list, right? And such. So, but then you break it down to say, well, do we have people who want to just look at it as ecotourism, right? Or do we have people who want to look at it as a sailing adventure? Or do we have people who want to do it as a camping adventure. And that's where you can break down and again use the spending predilections of people to understand which way to go at it. But it's a really critical thing to understand what is some of your unique things that perhaps won't be here forever. And I think that's the key thing to be thinking about.
Anything else? Oh, right up the back.
Hello, Wendy from Fantasy Cruising. I'm just wondering, before the presentation shared, is it possible to add in the contact for Australian product management on priceless.com? I've had a quick look at the Sydney products. It looks like you could do with some more experiences, like our priceless fantasy cruising product.
I like your answer. Look, it's always possible. We see everybody, right? There's no opt-out in our data. So it's the smallest to the largest, and everybody's in there. So we can always opt into any sector and look at anything. So it's always possible. That's the beauty of the data.
Now, this is your 102nd trip here.
Yeah.
What have you done on the other 101 times? In 25 words or less?
Well, I'm a big sailor, so I've done a ton of sailing all throughout. I love to hike, so I've done a lot of hiking here. I love art, so going down to Melbourne, doing the art scene down in Melbourne has been a key thing. You name it, I've done it. I love it, and I come down here and I like to dine out. I bring lots of different people with me all the time, so I think that's an important thing to expose new people down here all the time to this and remind them that it's 16 hours on a plane, of which most people pass out for 9. So, think of it that way. So it's not a big deal. And to be perfectly honest, it's very exciting to see, for example, now that American Airlines has a direct flight down here. This is critical for you because airline loyalty and loyalty programs are really critical. It's one of the things we run. And if you haven't started a loyalty program within your business, it's extremely important because the key thing is that loyalty drives people and thinking about what the reward is. And so American is, one of the most popular airlines in the country, and now that they come here direct, this has been a big reason to actually get people coming down here.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please thank Australia's one-woman marketing team, Sarah Quinlan. Thank you.